Hello, good morning and welcome to The Sunday Show. I'm Laura Goodwin. Here's what we have got for you this morning. The Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey, talks to me about a big increase to military spending and what that could mean for Scotland. After a heated campaign both for and against, Galloway and Ayrshire will not now become Scotland's third national park. Barry Goujon, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, is here to tell us why and what happens next. We'll hear from the producer of a new documentary telling the personal stories of 6 victims of Britain's deadliest terrorist attack. And we'll look ahead to Thursday's Holyrood by-election. Could it be the breakthrough moment for Nigel Farage's Reform Party in Scotland? And then it's over to Graham Stewart on the radio and BBC Sounds. Graham, what have you got for us today?
Yeah, good morning, Laura. We're discussing whether Aberdeen's oil and gas sector can make the just transition to renewables. We're talking whisky after a state-of-the-art maltings facility on Speyside was put on hold over all the uncertainty over tariffs and declining exports. And we have a regular review of the Sunday newspapers with the foreign affairs writer David Pratt and Hannah Roger of the Sunday Mail.
Plenty to get through. Great to have you with us, Graham. Right, let's get going. Good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of The Sunday Show. And you can join the conversation throughout using the hashtag BBC Sunday Show. Now, tomorrow, the UK government publishes its plans for the country's defence for the next 10 years. Amid a rapidly destabilising world, it's likely to see a massive increase in spending to boost munitions, troops and equipment after decades of underinvestment. Just before we came on air, I spoke with John Healey, the UK's Defence Secretary. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're due to publish the Strategic Defence Review in the coming days. Specifically, what is this going to mean for Scotland?
Well, it's a recognition the world has changed and we've got to react. This is, the SDR is the plan for change for defence. For Scotland, it'll mean both reinforcing our armed forces, bringing the new tech of AI, drones, alongside the hard metal of artillery, planes and tanks. But it also means the defence, getting a defence dividend from the increase in defence investment that we're putting in.
Yeah, can you just explain
that'll bring extra jobs right across the UK, including in Scotland.
What exactly does that mean, defence dividend?
What it means is that we've taken tough decisions in the face of the threats that we face around the world now and the requirement to step up on European security. So we're diverting funds directly from overseas development aid and putting them into defence. So we can make the plan to raise by a record amount the increase in defence since the end of the Cold War. That allows us to look at the SDR vision, to deliver the SDR vision that we'll publish tomorrow. And specifically for Scotland, it means reinforcing the big UK investment into businesses in Scotland. I'm the UK Defence Secretary. We invest over £2 billion a year with businesses and industry in Scotland. It supports 25,000 high-skilled, long-term jobs.
Right.
And a defence dividend means making sure that as we spend more on defence, we get more of a boost to British jobs, and we do that, British jobs, British skills, British business, British tech, right across the UK, including in Scotland.
I know you'll be setting out more detail tomorrow, but I wanted to ask you about a particular project led by Rolls-Royce. This was a cutting-edge welding centre on the Clyde, which the funding of which seems to be a little precarious at the moment. 2.5 million was due to come from Scottish Enterprise, but there are reports that this has been withdrawn due to Scottish Government's policy barring public funding for munitions. What are you going to do about that?
We have a really long-term partnership with Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce is central to much of the most important military equipment that keeps us all safe. And Rolls-Royce want to set up a new welding skills centre. This isn't just to support their munitions business, this is about supporting Scotland's shipyard pipeline as well, essential skills, new opportunities for young people. And I hear, and I can hardly believe this is the case, that the Scottish Nationalist Government are saying they won't step in to provide some of the funding to make sure this new welding skills centre can get up and running. And if the Scottish SNP government won't step up to support skills and the future of jobs in Scotland, then we will.
What do you make of that funding policy, given the global situation we're in?
Well, it's the first time I've come across it, but it really strikes me as student union politics. This is not a serious government concerned about the opportunities for young people for the future. It's concerned about the skills base of Scotland, or indeed the industry and innovation in the future. That means that Scotland has a big part to play, both in strengthening the British industrial base, as we will through more defence investment, but as it does at the moment, to play a bigger part also in reinforcing the security and the strength of our armed forces for the future as well.
Also reports that you want to buy fighter jets capable of carrying nuclear bombs. Where are they going to be based?
Well, when the SDR is published tomorrow, you will see that it talks about the new threats that we face. And my job as Defence Secretary is to make sure that we and the government do what's required to keep the country safe. I won't go into the detail of any of those reports, and those sorts of discussions have got to remain private. But I will say this about the nuclear deterrent, and this is a UK deterrent that for over 70 years has been our guarantor of security in the UK. It's what Putin fears most, and the UK is the only country that commits in full its nuclear deterrent to defence of our NATO allies. And strong deterrence is required and vital to keep people safe in the future.
You've said that you want to send a message through this review. What is the message that you want to send? And actually, what is the timeline for the readiness of all this?
This is a vision that we will deliver over the next decade. We're starting immediately with an announcement today of £6 billion over the next 5 years, going into creating more munitions, but also establishing new munitions factories. And we already know from Scotland, from Wales, from Northern Ireland, as well as England, we have first-class factories innovating and producing important technology and weaponry that we need for the future. And this will be an investment that we strengthen the British industrial base, we increase jobs, and we increase the opportunities, particularly for young people who need skills and long-term careers for the future.
I wanted to ask you a bit about recruitment and retention, because that has been a big challenge too. What's the plan on that?
It has. We saw over the last 14 years of the last government them set and miss recruitment targets each and every year of those 14 years in each and every service. So we have a long-run, deep-set recruitment and retention crisis. So the SDR tomorrow will put people at the heart of future defence plans, and we're acting already to increase pay, to improve housing, and just in the last couple of days I've made the commitment that over the next 5 years we will put an extra 1.5 billion into upgrading forces family homes. It's a scandal what we've expected our families to live in, and it follows on from the fact that I've managed this year already to buy back 36,000 of those military family homes that have previously been in the hands of private equity. So we now have control, we can plan for the future. We'll build new homes as part of making better use of MOD land across the UK to build the homes the country needs, but also the homes that our serving personnel and their families and our veterans need as well.
OK. John Healey, many thanks indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.
National parks are areas of land designated by law to protect natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage. Currently, Scotland has two, the Cairngorms and Loch Lomond and the Trossachs. But plans for a third became highly polarised. The campaign for and against creating the Galloway and Ayrshire National Park was heated, pitting local against local. And now, after a public consultation, the Scottish Government has scrapped the plan altogether. So what happens next? Well, joining me now from Brecon is the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Mary Goujon. Welcome to the Sunday Show, Mary. Before we get into national parks, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to what John Healey said there, describing the SNP's policy on the funding of munitions projects as student union politics. This in relation to a cutting-edge welding centre on the Clyde that reportedly might lose some of its funding. What's your response to that?
Well, as far as I understand it, the project wasn't actually eligible for funding because of the long-standing policy position that we have, that we do not provide or support the use of public funding for the manufacture of munitions. I think the key difference here between ourselves and the UK government is that when we have principles, we stick to them.
But principles are one thing, but we have a changing global situation. We have this big defence review. Does that withstand the defence needs of the country?
We completely understand and recognise the current situation that we're living in at the moment, and I think the really unprecedented threats that we face, and I think particularly when we see the war that's ongoing in Ukraine, and as I say, the wider threats. Now, when it comes to increases in defence spending, I mean, when that was first announced by the Prime Minister, the First Minister welcomed that because we recognise that. But that doesn't mean that we can't also still maintain the policy positions that we've had for quite a long time and have been long-standing within our party, that we don't support the use of public finance for the manufacture of munitions, and neither do we support that for nuclear weapons.
OK, let's get on to national parks. Why did you think creating a third national park was a good idea?
Well, this is a process that had been ongoing for a long time, and in fact had initially been part of the Butte House Agreement that we signed with the Greens in 2021. We'd had a debate in Parliament about the creation of a national park in 2022, where every party across the board welcomed that, and in fact recommended that we should do it immediately, and that there shouldn't just be the creation of one extra national park, but more should be created on the back of that as well. And that was where we then started a process allowing communities across Scotland to bid if they felt that their area should host Scotland's next national park. There was that period of consultation. That was then each of the bids that came forward. We had 5 bids initially. They were reviewed by an expert panel, and Galloway was selected as the one that essentially met all the criteria. And that was why last year I'd announced that we'd be moving to the next official part of that process,
so,
which was to designate a voter to
there was
undertake
consensus that this was something you felt would be positive for the area, positive for Scotland. Why then do you think you didn't manage to get it over the line or convince enough people that it would work?
Well, ultimately, it is up to the people who live in that area if this was something that they wanted to see or not. And I think ensuring that we had that bottom-up support and that community support for the proposal was really critical. Now, when we went through the process for the 5 bids, a key component of that was that communities had to evidence that they'd undertaken that engagement, and there was that support there. It was only when we then reached the next stage of the designation and that statutory part of the process, where we appointed Nature Scott to undertake the consultation work for us, that the debate very much became very heated at that point. But there was extensive engagement exercise, over 5,000 responses to the consultation, over 1,000 people attended the consultation events as well and put their views forward. And then the end result of that was that 54% of people living in Galloway and East and Southern Ayrshire did not support the creation of a national park. And when you look at the local responses to that, about 94% of the responses that we had to the consultation came from the local area or within 30 kilometres of where the boundary would have been. 57% of people said that they didn't want to proceed. And that's why Nature Scott ultimately made the recommendation that rather than proceed with the designation of Galloway and Southern Ayrshire as a national park, that we should instead look to build on the existing structures which exist in the area.
Well, it's interesting that you listened to the community on this point, but people living near the new proposed flamingo land, they've not been listened to. Why take different approaches? And in fact, in that case, 155,000 citizens said they didn't want flamingo land built in one of our current national parks, and a host of organisations, including SEPA, National Park Authority, National Trust for Scotland, also all saying bad idea, but they're not being listened to.
Well, I think what we have to recognise first and foremost is that these are very two different propositions that we're considering. So we're not looking at and comparing like
if you're saying that if a community doesn't want something and you listen to them in one circumstance but not another, that seems incongruous.
Well, I think we have to look at the different processes and the very different situations that we're dealing with in relation to this. So we'd been through a reporter process. The recommendation that came from Nature Scott as a reporter was that we do not proceed with the designation on the basis of the consultation and all the variety of different issues that they heard, and instead that we build on existing structures. And again, the process that had been through for that development. It's not possible for me to comment on the ins and outs of it because it is still subject to live considerations at the moment. But of course, a statutory process was followed for that, and a reporter had been appointed and has come forward with their recommendations, as is only right through that process.
In terms of the situation in Galloway, how much were you lobbied by large landowners and big energy companies? I mean, you said yourself that they were among those who had the biggest reservations, and they can be very loud voices.
Well, from my perspective, I wanted to hear from every voice that was involved in that consultation. I'd had engagement with the Galloway National Park Association. I'd actually first met them at the very start of their campaign when I was first appointed as a minister in 2018. But I see it as my role to meet with those from all sides of the debate on issues like this, and not favouring one voice over another, but really to listen to all of those views. So that's why I met and engaged with personally those who favoured and were in support of a new national park in Galloway, as well as those who were against it.
Those who were in favour of it are now very worried that the area is going to become a dumping ground for giant wind farms and energy infrastructure. It'll certainly make that a lot easier, won't it?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all, because I think that we also have to remember that we do have stringent planning processes in place and environmental assessments in place as well for these types of projects. So that's
like Flamingo Land.
Well, again, we have these stringent processes in place, so we can't forget that. But what is important are all the issues that we heard through that consultation process. And while we've decided not to proceed with the designation of Galloway as the next national park, what I did set out to Parliament when I outlined our decision there on Thursday was that the next steps we take from here are critical. We need to take a bit of time to consider the other proposals that came through that consultation process, not least from South of Scotland Enterprise as well, about how we can utilise some of the existing structures and really build on what are really strong foundations in Galloway and southern Scotland as we look to move forward from here. So
would you consider another location?
Again, I outlined that in Parliament. We set out the process right from the start about what that would look like to designate a new national park. We've now completed that process and we're not proceeding at this point. But I did also make clear in my statement to Parliament on Thursday that we do remain open to considering a new national park in the future. But how that goes forward from here, again, I've set out that we've been through this process. We've decided not to proceed with that designation.
I mean, unless you pursue this, who else is going to? I mean, this, as you say, this was born out of the Butte House agreement with yourself and the Greens. Has anything fruitful come from that alliance?
Well, what I think is important is that we went through the process and we listened to the voices, through the different community voices.
A lot of money, though, spent on a process for nothing.
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all, because either way, it's really important that we consult, we engage, and yes, that does take some funding to provide and to make sure that we're doing that as extensively as possible. And I wouldn't say it's been a completely fruitless exercise. Again, what we heard come through that consultation were a variety of different concerns that people had about, they want to see a positive future for young people. They want to see that investment across the local area. It highlighted other issues that exist. Now, we do have existing structures in place. And again, it's about how we really build on the strong foundations that are there before then setting out next steps and how we move forward.
How are you going to meet your nature restoration targets if you don't designate protected areas or more protected areas?
I think when you look at the national parks that we have in Scotland, in the Cairngorms, in Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park, they do incredible work when it comes to tackling the two biggest crises that we face today in terms of climate change and nature restoration. And Cairngorms has a project, Cairngorms 2030, where they've been able to lever in an extra, well, they're spending about £40 million on that specifically and levering in extra funding on the back of that too. So I think they can give a focus to that. But I think even out with our national park areas, there is significant investment that happens and takes place because we know we are facing a nature and climate emergency. And that is why the Scottish Government is still taking action across the country to try and address that. An example of that is the Nature Restoration Fund that we have, which has funded a variety, well, hundreds of different projects right across Scotland and not just within our national park areas.
OK, Laura Goodwin, many thanks indeed. Almost 4 decades after Pan Am Flight 103 crashed into a sleepy border town, the Lockerbie disaster still evokes fascination and questions. One constant is the grief and devastation felt at the loss of life. A new documentary, Lockerbie, Our Story, tells the personal stories of 6 victims of Britain's deadliest terrorist attack and will be available on the BBC iPlayer tomorrow and BBC Two and BBC Scotland on Tuesday.
Helga's watch was still ticking. It was still working, and it worked for a whole year afterwards. Is still somehow alive and working, and our daughter is dead.
I'm joined now by Alan Clements, the Managing Director of Two Rivers Media and Executive Producer on the documentary. Welcome to the Sunday show. I've watched the documentary. Even just rewatching that clip is very, very emotive. It is a story that we have told before, but yet you've managed to find people who have never really shared their experience before. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's a story that's very close to my heart. I was there on the night with my then partner, now wife, Kirsty Wark, and we were coming back from the Christmas party of the political show, not dissimilar to the Sunday show, and we were finished for the year, and the then controller, John McCormick, said, "There's a car, get down to Lockerbie." And it's funny, people say you can't sober up immediately, and you really can. And we worked through the night, and Kirsty went on air at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there were still bodies on the roof of the building we were broadcasting from. Still fires ablaze. So I had actually made documentaries about Lockerbie before, about all the theories and the conspiracy theories, but what had been lost, I think, along the way had been the personal stories. So when I worked with the director Stephen Bennett, I'd worked with a number of times before, including on Dunblane, Our Story. I knew he was a guy who could tell this properly and sensitively. And though the Moses have spoken before, it has really been about the politics. So the father, John, has talked a lot about the politics, but the mother, Lisa, had never really talked about Helga, and then the other 5 stories had never been told at all.
Yeah, it was absolutely extraordinary. And like you say, yes, you go through the what happened, who knew what, but the overarching message was the love of these families, and that constant love for the people that they have lost. How do you go about sort of carefully curating those stories? You know, as you say, we hadn't seen Helga's parents speaking like that before. How do you kind of build that confidence to get them to share that?
I think the selection process is incredibly important, and we talked to many, many more than those 6 people, as you might imagine. Sometimes people went to the length of being about to be interviewed and decided not to. And you always have to be sensitive to that, as well as having a duty of care afterwards. It's not just the making of the show, it's the post-transmission.
I imagine the fact that you and Kirsty were there might have helped a bit.
I hope so, and I think also Stephen sent examples of his work. We did the Marine A story, as I say, the Dunblane story, and they could see how he treated victims. I'd also done the Fire in the Night, the Piper Alpha documentary, and what you sometimes get is that it's actually quite cathartic for people to speak. And we talk about the emotional toll of speaking, which is obviously we keep first and foremost in our minds, but it can be helpful. It's almost therapeutic in a funny way. But people can always withdraw right up to the last minute, and I think it's about treating people sensitively and humanely.
There are still questions about Lockerbie, and you touch on that in the documentary, specifically about who knew what about the level of threat. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think there had clearly been warnings, and part of, I mean, there were so many sliding door moments. John's dad, Minas, was meant to be in a different flight, but wanted to attend his son's Christmas party. And a number of cheap tickets had come up because there had been a warning about a danger to an American flight. Not a specific one, but there were cheap tickets available. But we didn't really get into, was it the Iranians, was it the Libyans? Because Lockerbie's having a moment, 2 major dramas,
yes.
2 big documentary series. So there were plenty of other people doing that.
Or
I genuinely don't know. It's like buses, I guess, you know, they all came along at once. But we didn't want to be distracted by that. It was important to make that point because it explained why so many people got in the flight. But we just wanted to let the people tell their own stories. But I think what you see, for me, is it's actually it's a documentary about love.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's a documentary about loss and grief, and the grief is like the dropping of a stone, and you see the ripples out of that and across generations and across families, and the ripples never really end. And I think for me, that's the most moving part of it, that 37 years on, it still matters so much to these families.
Yeah, no, it is very, very moving, and you know, I think has been respectful of exactly. There's a moment that I also found very moving where you offer some information to the son of one of the victims, and he actually says, "No, I actually don't want to know anymore." Do you know what I mean? That just that raw grief was still there. He was a little boy, but you know, it was still right there, and it was very, very moving.
But his point was a really poignant one, which he says, "The death of my father must be much more than the event that killed him."
Absolutely. Listen, Alan, thank you very much indeed, and I hope everyone watches the documentary. I found it very, very moving. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse Scottish Parliament by-election is this Thursday, and the result could tell us a lot about next year's Holyrood elections. Here to tell us more is our political correspondent, Lindsay Buse. Lindsay, you have been out and about in the constituency. What do you think are the key issues on the doorsteps?
Yeah, good morning, Laura. I spent a bit of time in the constituency last week talking to potential voters. And I say potential because the overwhelming sense that I got from people there is that they are pretty much fed up. They're fed up with both the UK and Scottish governments and all of the political parties. Many of the people I spoke to are saying that they don't think they're going to actually vote in this by-election. Some of the issues they were raising, well, they ranged from things like the decision the UK government took on winter fuel to devolved issues such as concerns around the health service. But there was a lot of focus on local issues as well, namely the state of Hamilton town centre and a lack of investment, a lack of effort to improve things there. So I think, you know, turnout is going to be really key on Thursday. All of the political parties are going to have to work very hard to try to make sure that people actually go out and cast their vote in the polls.
And Lindsay, it's unusual in that we are particularly interested in who might come second in this particular by-election.
That's right, yeah, this by-election has been seen as a real test ahead of the Holyrood elections next year and in the wake of the general election last year. This has been seen as a two-way contest between the SNP and Labour. Both parties are saying that they have a chance, they have a really good chance of winning this by-election, but there is that unknown factor here, and that is Reform UK. National polling is indicating a rise in support for Nigel Farage's party, and there will be a lot of attention paid to whether or not they can translate that polling into actual votes and get people out to support them. They have revised up their ambitions for this by-election from finishing a close third to perhaps even coming into second place. But while I detected some support for Reform UK in the constituency, for every person you said who was willing to give them a chance, there was a person saying that they did not agree with Reform UK's politics or the politics of Nigel Farage. So come Thursday, when we get that result, it's going to be very interesting to see not only who wins this contest, but also how Reform UK perform.
OK, Lindsay, busy week ahead. And a full list of candidates for the by-election is on screen now and is also available at BBC Scotland's news website. And that is all from me today. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. The Sunday Show continues on the radio and on BBC Sounds with Graham Stewart. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye-bye.